Hello. Now this bed here in plot 4, I now need to get ready now for the upcoming season. For those of you that have our planner, you will know that our carrots are going in here. And we've been having harvests like that for the last, since October, hasn't it, Mrs. W? After taking the central head, we simply cut it away and then just let it keep growing its shoots.
And they were the Calibris, weren't they?
They were the Calibris, they were indeed. So yeah, it's a great way of actually getting more from the vegetable than just the central head that you took in the first place. Now, in today's programme, you'll be seeing a lot of the jobs that we do during the month that don't always make it onto our videos, simply because there's not enough dedicated time to be able to show you everything that we do. So there'll be a montage of the jobs that we have been doing through this month of February. Composting, as you can imagine, is something we do quite a lot of, and I would urge anybody, as like I said on our last video, to compost as much as you can. People say to me a lot of the time, how do you become a good composter? Well, you can give people recipes, methods, and that's all fine, that gives you a starting position, but actually I always think one of the most essential ingredients you need is yourself and your personality. You need to learn to become a scrounger. As you know, we grow our vegetables in our own back garden, so we're surrounded by neighbours, and there are one or two gardeners that do jobs for our neighbours that live in the village or the surrounding villages. We've gotten to know them well, and we ask them that periodically, every now and again, when they get a job where they're clearing shrubs and all sorts of things, could we have it? And they're more than willing to do that because it saves them having to get rid of it. So, with that in mind, this is some such stuff. This arrived about a fortnight ago from one of the local gardeners. He shredded it all up for us nicely, as you can see. And that's lovely and fine. That's going to compost down absolutely fantastically. So I'm going to take this up to the compost piles and get these empties. I've got 2 of these to do. You join us here today. It's a bit more sunnier, and I said during the jobs for the month, February is one of those months where you can get all of the seasons, not just in one month, but all in the same day. But it is a different day, and as you can see, when we were speaking earlier, we were saying about how we were taking the Calibris out of there and the cabbage stumps for the cabbages that were in there. That's been done, and you can see that I've prepped that ground by putting a nice 1-inch layer of compost over the top. But I did say in the jobs for the month that I would be looking to take the parsnips out of the ground toward month's end. And we are getting towards the month's end now. It's not very long, only 2 or 3 days, and we will be right at the end. So I decided to take these parsnips out, and we've had some lovely parsnips. We really have. You can see here, and if anyone's in any doubt about no dig, and because you haven't turned it over and aerated it and that these things can't grow, I mean, that's broken off the end there. I've no idea how long that was going down there, but you can see it's gone down a long, long way. Actually, I did have one here that unfortunately started to fork, but you can see just how the root is going down into our No Dig soil. And remember, we garden with very heavy clay soil here in Norfolk. I've never quite seen anything grow like that before. So you can see we've had 1 or 2 parsnips there out of the ground, looking really lovely, and some we shall put into a cold storage. They'll hopefully last there for a month, 6 weeks, that we can eat as and when we want. And then others Mrs. W will process, and we will end up putting those into our freezer. After I harvested those, I then put some compost onto this strip. And actually, if you just come around here, Mrs. W, I just wanted to show you that you can see that there is roughly about 1 inch of compost that is going on top. This is our soil. You can see it's a slightly lighter brown, and this is the compost layer that I've just put on. So it's roughly 1 inch, and that will feed our soil, which will in turn feed our vegetables that we grow, and it will also feed the whole year, not just now. There will be 2 crops that will ultimately end up going into this plot of land, and there's enough there to feed that without giving it any other extra feed. Hello, another day. Sun shining quite nicely actually this afternoon. It really is lovely. And I need to harvest a few things. Whenever I come out to harvest, the first place I will stop at is actually the chickens. And got a nice harvest of some of our bantam's eggs.
Lovely.
Yes, and it's so lovely with the fresh chicken's eggs. Make some lovely Yorkshire puddings with those. We can really notice the dark colours in there, and not the rather anemic pale yellows that you get from supermarket eggs, basically. Because our chickens are free range, or as free range as they can be. Sure, you've all read about the avian bird flu, and Norfolk in particular has been hit quite badly by it, so we do now have to keep them under cover, and they've been there really since back end of last year. No, not before that, wasn't it? It was probably August time, wasn't it, when we had to get those under cover. But there they've been, and we've been a bit concerned that maybe they're not so happy, because happy chickens do make happy eggs, and we are a big believer in that. But we've arrived into February, and as you can see, they have started laying again. And the one thing that we do try to make sure that we do is when we pull up anything from the garden, before it actually goes onto the compost heap, we try to put it into the chicken run so that they can have a peck around it, especially around the roots and the soil ball. And they love nothing more than to kick those about and take whatever is there from it, and it keeps them happy, and they've got something to do. And then whatever's left that they don't want, that's then when we then turn that to the compost heap. So that's that harvest. Now actually I need to be harvesting some lovely purple sprouting broccoli, which I am looking forward to, and I know Mrs. W is too. You can see these plants are really starting to produce quite a bit now. It was a couple of videos ago, but that was the central head that we actually took. And you can see how now it starts to throw up all these lovely side shoots. And that's about the size that you actually want. Once they get to about 4 to 5 inches long, you want to be cutting those. All this leaf is available to eat. It's lovely. The stalk, the knife actually fell through that stalk like a hot knife going through butter. I know we were actually in the supermarket the other day getting whatever essentials we needed, milk and butter and things, and I was looking at that, and I was saying to Mrs. W, really, it's like 4 or 5 of these, you know, and you're paying in excess of £2, £2.50, £2.60. Oh dear. You can be growing this yourself, and it comes out there really, really fresh. It'll be so tender when you eat it. Now, in this broad bean bed, if you remember, we had a couple of plants that didn't make it. So we've replaced those with, we had a tray up there where we didn't plant everything into this bed, and we just allowed those to grow on in case we had any casualties, and they have now been replaced. But if we look here, this is the remarkable things about broad beans. I often talk about how, you know, you can make more than one stalk, and it's called tillering. So if they tiller, they make more stalks. But actually, if you look at this plant, look, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4 stalks that's sent up. So yeah, quite often you can be growing these, and if they just send the single stem up, you're only going to get a harvest from that single stem. But to see that some of these have got 3 and 4 different stems on them, really quite encouraging, and I think they're really enjoying being in here. And hopefully we get a bountiful harvest sometime toward the end of May of lovely broad beans. Last week when we were out here, we sowed our beetroot and our radishes, and you can see they're all up, doing very nicely. So what I want to do is to plant these out. Some will go into the greenhouse and some will go into the soil outside. There we are. See, the roots are already well established in that clump, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4 in that one. And as with everything else that we like to do, we like to plant them nice and deeply, and then there they are on their way. Now, the other reason why I particularly wanted to show you where I was going to put these outside is that you guys are always eagle-eyed and you'll always pick things up. And 1 or 2 of you sort of said, you know, within your seed list, you're saying you're going to be sowing radish, courgettes and things like that, but they don't actually appear anywhere on your plan. Now, there's a reason for that. That's because I haven't yet decided where I'm going to put things. So things like radishes, turnips, spring onions, courgettes, things like that, they don't have a dedicated space in the main beds. And that's because I don't want 6 plants along here. There'd be far too many for myself and Mrs. W for starters to eat, because courgette bushes are just so prolific in their harvest. We simply don't need that many. So really we only need a couple of plants at most. And Mrs. W has told me this year that we've got to grow 1 green one and 1 yellow one.
For a change.
She's following the Carrow Road theme. So I'm not going to argue with her there. But no, in all seriousness, it is just because I haven't decided where I'm going to put things in. I decide at the time, you know, where I think they might be best to go, so that I can sort of rotate things roughly. You know, if I've grown, I think I grew some spring onions down this strip here last year. So I'll probably use the same space that you see here that is up in plot 5, and I'll probably put the spring onions up there, just so that there's a slight year's break. Having said that, if I want to run another row of spring onions just down here, it really isn't going to make that much difference. But it's just one of those things that I work out in my head as and when I go along. These things don't need a dedicated space. Now, as for the peas and the beans that you've been asking me about, well, we did say towards the back end of last year, but maybe you didn't see that video, but this season we are going to be growing our peas and beans on this arch. Last season they were here in plot 2, and we had all the work of putting the stakes in, although people thought it looked really, really nice with all the big stakes in, but it's quite a lot of work. So we're going to try growing the legumes in a permanent growing space. so they won't be rotated. And in the first half of the season, the peas will grow over that arch, and then when they've finished their harvest, we will then put out the French beans and the runner beans to grow over the arch. Now, it is something that we have never done before. We may get problems in doing that when it comes to the rotation of it all. But we're going to give it a go. And you'll be able to follow us over the next 3 or 4, 5 years or so and see whether it's had a detrimental effect on the plants, or actually do the harvests continually get better and better, or do they stay just the same and there's no problem whatsoever? We'll find out over the coming years. So I've had a lovely harvest of purple sprouting broccoli. Really can't wait to eat that this evening. And the chickens, they're busily laying their eggs. So as you can see, there's a lot that goes on here during the month. It's just that we can't always dedicate time to film everything. Sometimes we need to get out here while the weather is okay, as it is today. Who knows, in the next couple of hours or so, it could be absolutely throwing it down a rain. And we plan to do some catch-ups like this probably each month now, so the things that we haven't made a dedicated video on, we'll do a video a bit like this, a bit more vloggy, where you'll just see me from day to day, or Mrs. W doing certain things in the garden. We'll put them together as a montage. You can see what we have been doing for the month. Now, we were talking about the bean arch earlier, weren't we? And some of you eagle-eyed people may realise that it's a bit taller than it was. Mrs. W's had too many of those peas, so I made it another 2 foot higher so she can't reach as many. No, in all seriousness, the supports that are under this piping only came to about here, and it was actually pulling the thing down. So although essentially the structure worked, it never collapsed, but it was weighing it down with the weight. So we've found some other supports that are underneath these hoops that actually now come to about here. Hence why it actually is more now of an arch and not more like that rounded. So, and also I've had several of you ask me about the bean arch and how we made it, and of course it never really occurred to myself and Mrs. W that it would be a subject that you'd particularly want to know about. We just thought it's an idea we had, we'll just do it. So we actually never filmed exactly how we did it. But because we're going to be growing peas and the beans here this coming season, and indeed for the next few years, we're going to extend it to here. And we shall film that so that you can see exactly how we put this whole tunnel together, but just demonstrating it on this last piece that we're now going to put on. And it is something that we do need to be getting on with, simply because we're at the end of February now. The peas are about to be sown, and in about 3 to 4 weeks' time, they need to go into position. Somebody did ask me about potatoes a little earlier, and I said, you know, I can see on your sowing plan that you've got Casablanca, you've got Charlotte, you've got Maris Piper, but I can only see the Maris Piper on your plan. That's very true, that is all you can see. But we have to have some secrets, and hopefully you'll continue to watch as we go through March to find out exactly what's happened to those other potatoes. Please do leave us your comments down below and let us know what you've been up to. Has it been a good February for you? For us, February has probably been on the milder side. Yes, there have been some really cold days. It's been some really cold nights, especially at the beginning of February. We had some quite harsh frosts. But overall, it has actually been quite mild. Storm was Otto. It seemed to stay to the north of us. So although it got a bit breezy around here, we didn't see too much damage like we did in the previous year. So yeah, overall February's been good, but do let us know how your February's been and all the jobs that you've managed to complete. As we come out of February and into March now, everything steps up another gear. We're going to go from third to fourth. There's lots of seeds to sow, and there are lots of things that we can start planting out, as well as lovely things that we can still harvest within the garden. So don't leave the channel, do keep an eye on what's going on. And of course, actually, the very best thing you can do is to actually subscribe and click and turn on all notifications so that you know as and when we upload a video. Because as we do go into March, it'll probably more like a couple of videos every week, because there is so much to do and so much content that we can probably start getting 2 videos out there a week for you to watch. We shall see you next time.